So, Bill, when was the first time you heard the words hypertrophic cardiomyopathy?
I was in my late 20s, more mid to late 20s, but I was an avid power lifter. I worked out basically 6-7 days a week, was lifting extremely heavy weights. I was actually working. I had a personal trainer who was the strength coach at Notre Dame, again, lifting insanely heavy weight. And then one day I got dropped off from my carpool and I worked in downtown Chicago, and I was walking up Michigan Avenue, up a hill, and I started to get a little bit winded. And I was like, this is weird. Like something's not right. I had a very heavy briefcase because I had, a computer in it and a lot of stuff in my briefcase. So I thought maybe that's it. I'm lugging around a 30-pound briefcase. And it kept happening every day. And so I shed the briefcase thinking, will that make a difference? And it didn't. So after I think it was about 3 weeks, I decided, so my doctors were always at Northwestern. So I'm lucky to say that my general physician, my general practitioner was at Northwestern. So I was already in a quote unquote COE at the time, even though I don't think COEs existed in the early 2000s. The long answer to your question is after 3 weeks, I called my doctor. My doctor said, I think you need to see a cardiologist. And so he referred me over. They brought me in. They listened to my heart. They did an EKG. They saw some abnormalities. They did an echo. And that was the first time I heard, you have HCM. To be quite honest with you, at that age, being, again, an avid power lifter and being a young, successful guy in downtown Chicago, I was scared shitless, to be honest with you. I thought I was going to die. And at that same time, my cousin died in his sleep about 10-ish years earlier. And he was a fireman, and he was also very active and fit. 27 years old, just passed away in his sleep. They classified his death, because it was in the early 90s, as crib death, because they basically didn't even know what to call it. He just died. His heart stopped. And now, as years have progressed, we now realize the mutated gene that I have, which is the most common gene, runs in my mom's side of the family. And my aunt has it and has had it. And they've done a lot of case studies on her, because she's actually 95 now and living and never had a myectomy. Doesn't have a pacemaker or defibrillator. My mom had it. She unfortunately passed away because of it. It led to congestive heart failure and she passed away. And then my uncle has it, but he is also now almost 90 and still alive. No open heart surgery. So from a familial standpoint, my mom made it to 85. My uncle is still alive at 89, and my aunt is still alive at 95, all with it, without surgeries. So I think that gives me some hope. But at the time, I thought I was going to die, and for quite some time, it was very scary. I remember a lot of doctors were in that room when they told me HCM, and I was like, HCM, what's HCM? I didn't understand it. How could I have a heart problem? I work out all the time. So very scary time at 27, 28 years old to be faced with your mortality.
Well, that's a hell of an introduction for today's episode of Tales from the Heart, a podcast from the Hypertrophic Cardiomyopathy Association. And I am Lisa Salberg, your host today. And I am thrilled to have with me Bill Rossi, who holds a lot of different titles. And as we go through this podcast, we're going to uncover many of his titles. Most importantly for this podcast, I'll just take the top ranking here. Bill is a member of our board of directors and one of our ambassadors here at the HCMA, and we are proud to have him on our team, and his help and guidance have really helped the HCMA reach this new level of service and professionalism and transparency and all the good things boards should be with great governance. So Bill, thanks for your volunteerism and your commitment to the community. And you've set us up on an interesting introduction for you in HCM. It's scary. You have a cousin who dies young, but you have all these octogenarians plus in the family. So we have in one family the snapshot of how unpredictable HCM can be and how much we've learned over years. So welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. You know, I'm excited to be here. No pun intended, but the HCMA is near and dear to my heart.
We accept puns here, and if you're watching the video clip, we also now have the mugs that say Big Heart, Big Life, and the HCMA. Cheers to you and our punny little community of big-hearted folks.
And it has a built-in spoon, everybody, which is amazing if you put any kind of additive to your coffee.
Well, there's things that go with the coffee mugs. We have coasters, custom coasters, one for the podcast, one for the webinars. Centers of Excellence. So we have fun little coasters now. So they'll be on the website soon. We just things to make you remember us throughout the day. So Bill, tell everybody a little bit about the bill outside of the HCM bill. So what's your family like? What do you do for a living? Let's let everybody open the door and see who Bill Rossi is.
I'm probably not your average everyday HCM individual. I'm one of those individuals that kind of pretends I don't have HCM, and I just live my life every day to the fullest, knowing that it is what it is. I've always faced adversity. So I'm actually a member of the LGBT community, and not to get too much into that path, but I was raised a devout Catholic. And so I went to Catholic school, and I was always taught that homosexuality is a sin. And so I was leading a very heterosexual life and had lots of girlfriends. And finally, in college, I actually went and got a degree in psychology because I knew something was different. I knew in high school something was different, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. And then as time progressed, I realized what my truth was. However, because of society at the time and my religion and my family, I chose to deny that existence. So I've faced adversity at a lot of levels, and my stories go in many different directions here. So there's a lot of firsts with Bill Rossi. I started the first gay dating service in the country back in 2005. I was in every major publication that there was in Chicago. I was on TV. I was interviewed on every TV channel. My partner and I were even on the cover of the Chicago Sun-Times because we had our twins. They were actually biologically my children. And it was kind of back then a new thing, right? Cutting edge, we didn't do traditional surrogacy. We did gestational surrogacy, which was a much more expensive approach. But anyhow, so that landed us in a lot of places. But going back a step, when I was on all those TV channels, the funny part is I didn't come out to my family prior to that. So my entire family found out because I worked in the investment world. And I worked in a private holding firm, and we owned a bunch of companies and a bunch of commercial real estate. So when we decided to start this from an authenticity standpoint, the investor said the owner has to be gay, right? You can't have a straight person owning a gay dating service. And hence how I got my ownership in that company. Anyhow, that is how I came out to my entire family. It was not met positively, especially in my extended family. I had a lot of very not nice things said about me. Bottom line I was faced with a lot of adversity from people. I give one example that people are blown away by, and that is one of my uncles passed away, 4 cousins in the procession line. And the one cousin, the female of the 4, one was a female, 3 were males. And the female didn't even let me express my condolences. She looked down, put her hands together, and wouldn't even look at me. Prior to knowing that I was LGBT, I was one of her favorites. But that was, so, and then I was told I was a disgrace to my family. Anyhow, guess what it did, folks? It made me work harder. It made me prove everybody differently that I wasn't a disgrace to my family. I am also now the first openly LGBT person on the United States Chamber of Commerce Small Business Council, which is pretty cool. It's the biggest lobbyist group in DC, advocating on behalf of small businesses. And about a year ago, they had talked to me about becoming a face person for the U.S. Chamber. Now, the bigger entity, right? This is what drives an overseas business in the United States. And they featured me this year in June for Pride Month. So again, another first for Bill Rossi. I've been with my partner. I dated men. I started to date men. And then I met my partner after about a year and a half of coming out, right? So in my mid-20s, and we've been together 24 years. I have two biological twin daughters, identical twin daughters. They are now 16. They just started driving. Best day of my life, I'll tell you, was, and this was done intentionally, we got them genetic tested for the gene, and they called me 3 days before Christmas and told me that they did not have the gene. And one of my daughters was actually born with a congenital heart defect. Even though they're identical twins, one had a heart defect, one didn't. She had open heart surgery at 4 months. Hardest day of my life ever, because I was faced with potentially losing my 4-month-old daughter. She survived. She's doing amazing, and not related at all to HCM, just a congenital heart defect. But obviously that guilt at first, I thought that was driven from me. Anyway, best Christmas present ever. They called me 3 days before Christmas and told me that both my children, obviously being identical, did not have the gene. And I fell to my knees crying, and I was extremely happy because I knew they weren't going to have to face the things that a lot of us face. And it's harder for some than others. Obviously, we all have different resiliency levels. I tend to have a very high resilience on everything, right? Hence an entrepreneur, right? So why don't a lot of people start their own businesses? Because it's scary, right? It's a big risk. I mean, you did it, Lisa, right? You started the HCMA.
It's very scary.
Look where you're at now.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, wow. So let me just unpack a couple of things here because
Sure.
There's so much to unpack here. So number one, many members of the HCMA community are members of the LGBT community. There's a lot of alphabets there. Excuse my...
There's more pluses than minuses.
There's a lot of pluses. So LGBTQ plus, all of you.
Yeah.
I have transgender members of my own family. I have been exposed to younger children coming out, which was really nice for them because they came out in a situation where we as a family could help them through a process. It's a different day. And one of my dearest, closest, oldest friends who happens to live in Chicago is also, he's a gay man. And I just love that the world has changed. It's not changed quite enough, that people are accepted more readily, but not enough. And lots of people have HCM, including ones who are LGBTQ and ones who are not, and ones who might not like the other side so much. So we are Switzerland, people. We accept every big heart, and wherever you come from, we accept you for who you are. And we just want everybody to be happy and healthy. So thank you for sharing your life with us, because that is an intimate part of one's life. It doesn't necessarily need to be the top level of conversation. It's just who you are, and it's part of what makes you you. And love it. So yay you for that. And the fact that you have biologic children in that day and age, that was cutting edge. That was a bold move for...
Yeah. And it was even bolder to put them on the cover of top newspaper in Chicago.
Yeah, it's so bold and out there. So that says a lot about you, bold and out there. That's kind of who you are. And that's why when we came to know each other, the timing wasn't right when you first said, hey, I want to get involved. I'm like, I got to go get a heart transplant. I'm a little bit of a hot mess right now. Let me get myself together. I'll be back at you. And I think there's two HCMAs, even though it's always been one, the pre-transplant Lisa and the post-transplant Lisa. Like, we got to do what we could do with the energy that I had back then. And now, like, you put new batteries in the ever-ready bunny here, and here we go, right? So we have so much new talent joining our board, and we have so much vision and bold visions for what the future is that we want to see develop. And we are in a position to guide it to there. And part of that is because we're leaning into experiences. So I want to talk to the business, Bill, for a moment, please. Can you just explain to the listeners the type of businesses that you've been involved with and the growth and the opportunities that you see maybe for HCMA in the future based on your vantage point?
So I'm involved in a lot of different businesses. The laughing joke at the U.S. Chamber is I'm a serial entrepreneur. I joke I'm like a Shark Tank guy, but not as wealthy. So I started my own business again back in 2005 And I function as a fractional COO or CFO for small to mid-sized businesses who can't afford a full-time and need the guidance and direction of a C-level executive. I'm trained in what's called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, acronym is EOS, and it's a proven system for small and mid-sized businesses to scale, kind of go to the next level. I'm involved in, of all things, a heterosexual dating service, the biggest traditional matchmaking service in the world, actually. It's franchise-based business. So that is a B2C, a business to consumer enterprise. Most of what I do is B2B, business to business. And the professional services world, I work with a PR firm in Chicago that has quite a few notable clients like Red Bull and Giordano's and Stefani Restaurant Group and the American Library Association. And then I work with a big advertising agency in Chicago that has clients like Culligan. They've worked with McDonald's. They have national account for McLaren, the very high-end sports car. So some very notable clients. Did
they give you a car?
I know, right? Those
cars, donate a car to the cause. Okay.
Yeah. And then I work with a nonprofit out of LA that works with underprivileged youth and takes them on camping trips of all things and exposes them to nature. And that is a really cool thing. I've been involved in that company since about 2011. And then I've got a couple architectural firms, pretty notable ones, actually. I can't share quite yet the exciting things they're working on because I'm under an NDA, but there are some really big notable things that pretty much everybody would know that if they heard the name. They're working on a new concept for that. And they do a lot of very high-end restaurants across the country and casino work, very well-known places. And then a commercial furniture company, which is obviously tied to those two businesses. And then the one thing that kind of doesn't fit with anything, which is a gourmet popcorn company. So everybody's always like, what? You work with popcorn? So I'm either working with these companies or a co-owner in these businesses. And actually, 3 of those businesses are, so the popcorn business is actually the nation's first and only NGLCC certified popcorn company. So a number of the businesses that I have co-ownership in, we are just like there's women-owned businesses, WBEs and MBs, minority-owned businesses. There are LGBT-owned businesses that are certified through the NGLCC out of Washington, D.C. So that has opened doors. We've worked with Target, UPS, and American Airlines, and so a lot of very big companies that we probably would have never been able to even get into if it wasn't for that certification. So yeah, so from a business standpoint, got my hands on a lot of different stuff. Very busy, crazy entrepreneurial life. I don't get a day off. 7 days a week, as you know, Lisa, you never get to stop.
Nope.
But I thrive on it. So that's the difference. Like I can tell, I say, like 2 key components of EOS is you got to love what you got to love what you do. You got to like the people you work with. And one thing I can say, because there's so many people who wake up every day and dread going to work and dread doing what they're doing. I can tell you since I was 27, I've never once woken up and said, oh my God, I got to work today. Like I have, and I started my businesses in my low 30s, but I've loved what I've done and I thrive off of it. And obviously I hate monotony, hence why I'm involved in so many different things. But so that's my business life. Any questions?
Oh boy, so many. So obviously, the name of our podcast is Tales from the Heart, and we focus on things related to the HCM community. And what I wanted to do with this particular edition of the podcast, which is more of a patient conversation, is to really look at what somebody can accomplish with their diagnosis and with bumps in the road, potholes sometimes, big ones sometimes, that are the life with HCM. So you've explained to us that you're kind of a trailblazer in the LGBT community and very out there. You've shared with us that you've elevated yourself in your business acumen to being on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Small Business and being very involved there. But while all of this stuff was happening and all of these deals being made and work being done and hours of work, you're also dealing with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, with obstruction, and with arrhythmias. So now give us the highlight points of when HCM became a real pain in the ass for you. And let's timeline that to your business life, because you had to do this good orchestra
at the same time. Yeah. So obviously I will say, and hopefully your listeners get a kick out of this, but I actually I was getting my MBA when I first got diagnosed, and I was working, but I was bartending. And I actually was bartending at one of the biggest bars in Chicago, and I loved it. I will say bartending was so fun, no stress. But as soon as my diagnosis came, guess what the doctor said? You can't lift anything heavy anymore, because that was the big thing, right? No heavy lifting. Well, I was lifting cases of beer and kegs of beer, and I had to stop. So I had to quit that. And it was really, a shock to me at that time that this one thing that I had so much fun doing, I had to stop doing it. And then you can't work out. So I literally they said no more working out, right? So no more powerlifting. And again, we're talking early 2000s. So this was before they really had a good sense of what you should and shouldn't do and couldn't do, right? And so after about 3 months, I was told you can, now here's the funny thing. After all these years, I do work out still 6 to 7 days a week, every day consistently, because even though I have a bad heart, I want to keep my bad heart as healthy as it can possibly be. So I work out and very fit and very active. And I do an hour of half hour of cardio every day and a half hour of light weights. I've never lifted heavy weights after all of that, but I stay toned. And but I was told at that time, and it stuck. And after all these years, 20 plus years, one extremity at a time. So I never, even when I bench press, I do one arm at a time. When I curl, one arm at a time, one leg at a time. Like I don't do both extremities because I was told not to. So I got conditioned to not do that from early 2000s till now, and it's just stuck in my weightlifting. So as we've progressed, right? So this is all happening. I'm working at the investment firm, and, my life was just different. So here's the thing. I'm very competitive, if this hasn't been figured out by all of you listening.
We figured that out.
So, my dad used to say, I reminded him of Lexus, always striving for perfection. I graduated summa cum laude from a top 5 university. Like I've straight A's all through school. Like I pushed myself. Like I always wanted to be the best of the best. And I also played sports when I was younger. But when I had to give all that up, like my partner and I, we played competitive volleyball together. Even though I'm short, I was a pretty good volleyball player. I played soccer all through school. I was a really good soccer player. And I had to give all that stuff up, right? Because back then, that's what they said. No sports, no weightlifting, no running, no anything. And I was a sprinter, by the way. So all that stuff just had to stop. And I started to get back into, about, I'd say 3-4 months in, I said, can I start working out? And they said, as long as it's light weights, you're not doing anything too extreme, So for a very long time, I went, and again, remember, I was at a COE at the time. I switched because I wanted a second opinion to another major hospital in Chicago for a second opinion, was given some very decent advice there as well. But same kind of path, right? Like you have HCM, you need to not do these things and be careful. So I went a good 10 to 12 years without any problems, no medication. And then about 10-ish plus years in, then it's like, okay, it's time for a beta blocker. So at first, and I remember this vividly, I was like, clearly not on any medicine, right? I'm this fit, active guy. And I'm like, what's this going to do to me? And the saying that was told to me is, if you're on the right beta blocker, you'll never even know you're on a beta blocker, which was a true statement, because I got on the beta blocker and I never knew I was on the beta blocker. So managed it on the beta blocker for quite a few years. Well, then I started to have arrhythmias. And that was where things started going a little bit awry, to say the least. And it was really impacting me. And I was struggling emotionally, mentally with all of this stuff. And that was right around 2013 where I started having all these arrhythmias. It was AFib. And obviously, you have a thickened heart. And I was very attuned. I've always been very in tune with my body. I know when things are not right. So I would feel every single heartbeat. And when your heart is beating in AFib, it's very uncomfortable. It's like, yeah, I try to explain to people who've never had it. It's like running on a treadmill and you're just sitting still and not doing anything. Like it is a very you can't sleep. Like it was just really, really bad. So I got cardioverted, honest to God, over 20 times in a year. I was constantly going into AFib. I had an ablation. It didn't work the first time. Almost bled to death. Like I had some traumatic experiences. Like they had to sit and hold pressure on me because I wouldn't stop bleeding. And like it was a lot. But you know what? Again, I told you, I face adversity head on. I get nervous, I get scared, but I know I have to stay positive. That's one thing about my entire life. I will say, you've got to remain positive. There's always somebody who has it worse than you. And so I look at these, as you said earlier, as little road bumps. Some of them are big road bumps. Anyhow, they decided to put the pacemaker defibrillator in 2015. So now you're basically 15 years into diagnosis that I had the ICD placed. Again, was very scared getting it done. My recovery was pretty darn quick. And I know I was back into the gym in 2 months. And again, light lifting, especially on the arm where that ICD was placed. I've adapted now, my little Ironman guy that I have as part of my body. Actually, I'm getting it changed for the first time early next year. So that is going to be my first replacement. But anyhow, so that was 2015. So then I had more arrhythmia issues, and it was decided in 2018, you've got to get the septomectomy. Now, I want to share this because I think it is important. I've shared this with a couple people, obviously, that Lisa and I commonly know too with my story, because I want it to be a learning lesson. Remember, I said earlier, I went and I got multiple opinions. You do that, right? Just in anything. It's always good to get multiple opinions because everybody has an opinion, but you want to get multiple and credible opinions, right?
Correct.
And one of those doctors said I didn't need the myectomy from the beginning and that I could hold off. I was still fit. I was still living life. Like I was still exercising. And yes, I can't do the things that I would love to do. I'd love to run a marathon. I can't. But I was still living my life daily. The other specialist in HCM said from the beginning, you need to get a myectomy, like 10 years earlier, said this. And I didn't want to do it because guess what? I was scared. So I probably pushed it farther than I should have. And when they decided that they were going to do the myectomy, it was going to get done quickly. It was within a couple months. And they did 4 procedures in one. So they did the maze procedure, obviously, to address the AFib, all the arrhythmia issues, because the ablations and all the anti-arrhythmia drugs were just not working for me. So they did the maze procedure. They did the appendage clip, as you guys may or may not know, is that little muscle inside the heart. That is where blood can pool behind, which is what could lead to a stroke. So to remove that risk of having a major stroke, they clipped that appendage. They fixed my mitral valve, which was damaged from years and years of HCM. And then they did the removal of the thickened muscle. And so it was like 4 procedures in one, right? I wore a Superman shirt into that surgery that day because I was scared. I didn't know if I was going to come out alive, but I was, again, staying very positive. And I actually reached out through the website, through the Facebook group, about anybody who had all 4 of those procedures done. And some people were like, I had 2 of those done. I had 3 of those done, but nobody had all of them done. So I decided to record the whole thing. So I was like, you know what? I want to help other people. So I recorded my literally the first thing I did coming out of surgery, and people are like, you're nuts. But I was a big brother. So, Julie, obviously on our team. So if you watch Big Brother, her name is Julie, the host. And so I come out of it still dazed under anesthesia, but I was like, hi, Julie. But anyhow, but I came out, I'm obviously a bit confused when I did it, but I recorded it, my first awakening after, with my whole family standing in front of me. And then I documented my recovery. And they said I was at day 3 was recovering faster than most people. And I was doing at day 3 what people do at 3 weeks. But I pushed myself and I was out of the hospital in 4 days. So these are all like road bumps, right? The ICD implantation was a road bump. The myectomy was a road bump. Now, knock on wood, I have had I don't smoke. I don't do any drugs. I don't drink alcohol other than wine, and I keep it at bay. I know my limits because alcohol can be a trigger for arrhythmias. So I have managed to stay on the status quo since 2018. So we're going on, 7 years now of status quo. Now, I'm going to be real. I know the other shoe's going to drop at some point because that's just the way this fun little disease works. Yeah. So I am always, that is why I said earlier, I live every day to the fullest, because you just don't know. But it doesn't sit at the forefront, just like being LGBT doesn't sit at the forefront. I am who I am. I live authentically me, and I just persevere through. So I did all of this stuff. So clearly, again, the competitive nature, I've sunk because I can't do, I would be running marathons. I would be playing on sports teams, but I can't do that stuff. So I've sunk it all into work. So hence that explains like my drive on the business side.
So instead of getting your competitive edge out in an athletic form, you've moved it to the boardroom and to the business arena.
Correct.
I might resemble that remark. Okay. So Bill, there's so many connections here to how I've managed life with HCM and business, and how you kind of move them both together. And sometimes one has to come to the front for a little bit, but you tend to put what you want to do in front, and the things that you have to do are on the side. I had to have HCM until I had a transplant. I had to be somebody who couldn't physically do what other people could physically do. And then I also, when I went through my transplant, similarly to your myectomy, I decided at that point, I was either going to hold everything back and not tell anybody anything about anything, or I was going to be 100% transparent. It couldn't be anything in between, because if I left holes, people would fill in the holes with nonsense or whatever. So there couldn't be any holes. And not telling the community everything just wasn't how I live my life. Our community is kind of all in this together. So I took them along. And I too, one of the first things I did waking up was go live on Facebook. I'm like, I'm not dead. And I think that's pretty much what I said. And that was it. So focusing on, and I know this is maybe not the healthiest way to recover, but it worked for me and it seemed to work for you. I was thinking about, okay, what is the next milestone that I can report on? And I didn't necessarily do it to show off or get there faster. I'm like, okay, what's the next thing I'm going to talk about? Oh, I have to do this so I can talk about it. I have to sit up. I have to walk the hall. I have to get these chest tubes out. I have to get into step down. I have to get out of the hospital. And all of these little milestones, I was reporting in live time, which made me a little bit accountable to my own recovery.
Sure.
And let me benchmark myself. I always tell people to have your benchmarks. You don't always have to hit every one, but if you're trying to get out of the hospital within 7 days, hey, if you got out at 5, bravo you. If it took you 8, it's okay. But to have some numbers in your recovery process and know where you want to go. And that, my dear, leads us to the word that you said to me before we went live today. And that's, you're a thriver. You're not a victim. You're not a survivor, which you are. You're a thriver with HCM. Can you define to me what that means, and to our listeners what being a thriver means?
Yeah, I mean, I think at its most simplistic level, it is a card I was dealt. It's genetic. It's not like I did anything wrong to get this disease, right? I was born with it. As of now, there's not a cure for it. There's things in the works. Like I will say, in my lifetime, 4 years ago, I would have never thought that there was going to be myosin inhibitors and there were going to be better treatments or even potential gene therapies. And now here we are, right? A lot of things, technology, and now with AI, things can even move faster. So, I think, again, I was born with it. It wasn't anything I did. I had to embrace it. So I have a bad heart. I was born with a bad heart. And this heart has a path that I don't know what it's going to take, just like you, right? Like what do they say? 90% of people with HCM it's the 10% that have the myectomies, right? 90% manage it with medication and lifestyle changes. And I happen to be in that 10%. And then what, out of the 100% of HCMers, 3% have to have heart transplants. That may be in my future. I don't know. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But as of right now, I'm status quo, but I don't focus on it. So when I say I'm thriving, I'm doing everything I possibly can in my power to stay positive, live my life to the fullest, not let this disease define who I am. Yes, it's a pain in the ass sometimes, and it gets in my way of what I'm trying to do. But then I hyper focus on whatever it is, get through it, and move on. I want to focus on the future solutions, not on the past.
But the past gives us the impetus to want to change the future, and sharing our experiences as a community, organizing those thoughts, bringing it forward for legislative change. And you're also participating.
And I'm part of that too.
Bill's an all-in kind of guy. He's like, I want to do this and this and this and this. You went to DC with us. We went to the Hill. We talked about the importance of knowing one's heart health history. We've talked about the importance of well child examinations, including family heart health history questions, pre-participation screening physicals, AED, CPR, preparedness. The whole ecosystem has to be ready because this is the world we all live in. And 1 in 200 people could have HCM. That is 1.3 million Americans alone could be living with a diagnosis, the condition of HCM undiagnosed. Only about 15% have actually been identified so far. So 85% of our brethren are out there wondering why they can't walk up a hill, wondering why their heart races out of nowhere, wondering what happened to their aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings, and would that maybe happen to them? We're living in a pretty amazing time with therapies, with knowledge, with the ability to share experiences to really shape the future and create more thrivers and less victims.
Yes, I agree. That and as you well know, like I invest a lot of time into the HMA because I obviously I want to do everything I can to help this organization and to help others out there with this disease or family members with this disease. Like again, sharing my story, like I've become quite successful in my realm, right? And I didn't let this disease stop me from doing that. And nobody else has to either. I read a lot of comments. I obviously watch the page and I see a lot of people who are very depressed and they're not living life to the fullest. You get one life. Live it to the fullest. Do what you can.
My favorite line ever from my favorite poem ever. And yes, I have a favorite poem, and it's appropriate because it's the start of summer officially this week. And it's Mary Oliver's A Summer Day. And the line is, tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. I used to have it on a bracelet. It's a mantra. It's on the wall of my house. It's what I think about every single day. From the day before my transplant to the day I woke up from my transplant, and every day since then. What am I going to do? I got one shot at this. How am I going to make my imprint on the world to make it better than when I got here? And the HCMA has grown into such an amazing organization to serve so many. And yep, it was my idea, but that's not how it got to where it is. It's partnership, it's teamwork, it's critical thinking, it's tough conversations. And where are we going next? And I'm thrilled to have you on our team. And I'm super proud of all the work that you're doing and how you have taken HCM as part of just your journey, not the only thing, but a part of you. And I think you've placed it in a really healthy perspective. And I want to teach others how to do that too.
Constant reinforcement. And again, I literally wear shirts that say lead with kindness, but because I think everyone should treat each other with kindness and respect regardless. And then I do my best every single day to stay positive. And I turn every negative as much, it's like making lemonade out of lemons, right? Like it's a skill. It is a skill, and it's constant resetting, because we all are human. We all have weak points. We all have bad days or less than perfect days, but you have to try to turn those days around and do the best you can. Persevere.
Even on the darkest day of my life, I found one little thing that was a bright spot, and it's what got me through. And it's the lowest probably I've ever been in my life. And it was the day my sister died. Even in her death, I had no idea what was coming. I didn't know what I was going to build in her memory and honor, but my sister was an organ donor. And even though I wasn't going to keep my sister, and she wasn't going to be here to be a mom to her kids, and my parents were losing their daughter and all these horrible, terrible things, there's this one little pinprick of light. So even in the darkest moment, you can find a spot to focus on and find the light and bring it back in. 3 people lived that day because my sister gave her kidneys and 2 kidneys and her liver, and they lived, and they had years to go, and they may still be alive, but the kidneys only lasted about 10 years, but they got 10 years and then they went to living donor. So bravo. Even in the darkest moment, you can find light. Even while you're recovering from your myectomy, you can find something to focus on to be positive. Even when you need a defibrillator put in or replaced, okay, I'm now protected.
Right. That's the thing. You just got to find the positive. Like, now you have that insurance policy in place. Like, is it a nuisance? And people stare, right? I mean, I will tell you, when we go on vacation and I'm sitting out at a pool, people see the big scar down the middle of my chest and the big pacemaker defibrillator sticking out of my chest. But I don't look like somebody who's sick because I work out so often, and it actually has started a lot of interesting conversations with strangers at the pool. They're like, what happened? Like, why do you have that? And so I'm educating as I meet people and talking about it.
And that's a really healthy way to deal with genuine curiosity and making the best of the situation. So, Bill Rossi, we've gone 45 minutes today. I knew we were going to go longer.
Shocker. I can't imagine you and I talk for more than
a day. Yeah. It has been lovely to have you on Tales from the Heart. And the dogs agree. It's time to wrap. You had 45 minutes.
No dogs barking until the very end. Perfect timing.
You know what they were saying? They were saying, "Hi, Carl." And that is for Joey, our podcast editor, because his dog, Carl, is just the most adorable dog ever. Don't tell the other 3 I said that, but they were saying hi to Carl. So, Bill, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you to the sponsors of the HCMA for making podcasting available to us. You can pick up our podcast anywhere you pick up your podcasts. You can view it on YouTube. You can listen on Spotify or iTunes. Thank you, Bill, for joining us. And please stay in touch with the HCMA. And you guys have a happy and healthy summer.
Thank you for having me.
The Hypertrophic Cardiomyopathy Association thanks the following sponsors for today's podcast: Cyokinetics, Bristol Myers Squibb, BioMarin, Tenaya Therapeutics, and Viz AI.